Matt Rogerson, head of public policy at the Guardian. How are you at the Guardian coping with the new role of BBC?
So I think at the moment we're concerned about the way in which the BBC is becoming more aggressive across commercial social networks, and looking at ways in which that could be examined through charter review. Ultimately, there's very little we can do in terms of the BBC's distribution of content, but I think charter review offers the opportunity to think about what the role is of public service broadcasters with commercial social networks.
And how are you handling with the aggressive social media turning for BBC?
So I think what we're doing is looking at that carefully in terms of whether it crosses a line in terms of whether it can be characterised as public service journalism or whether it's chasing numbers. I think, as I said in my talk earlier on, I have every sympathy with the way in which the BBC is trying to ensure that it's present on these social platforms. The issue is just whether in doing that they chase softer, more viral content rather than the timely, comprehensive journalism that the BBC is known for.
You spoke about the BBC's blockbuster series. What's your take about that?
So I think the great irony of the BBC is inside the UK, politicians are quite sceptical about the BBC and sometimes quite angry about the role of the BBC, but what you see is outside the UK, the BBC is regarded as a great British export and a sign of British soft power. So it's kind of a slight irony that the BBC is seen as a great British export, but there are kind of some wrinkles to that story as well. But I think the quality content they produce around Sherlock and Doctor Who is absolutely what the BBC should be doing. I think where we have questions is about whether they should be commercialising their news content outside the UK to the detriment of publishers like The Guardian, who are trying to create a sustainable business model.
Yeah, but they could do Sherlock Holmes, but are they going to do X Factor and this?
So this big part of charter review is focused on a show called The Voice, which I think you have over in mainland Europe as well, where the BBC have actually decided they're not going to renew their contract for The Voice next time, and that's going to move to ITV. So they are making moves to decommercialise, if you like, the content they produce.
At The Guardian, are you looking at more media regulations in the future? Is that what you want?
So I think if you look at the direction of travel for media regulation, there's likely to be less media regulation rather than more. I think the rise of big platforms, big kind of supranational platforms, mean that regulation at a nation-state level is going to be less. I think most regulation is likely to happen at a European level through the AVMS directive and through the digital single market work that's going on at the moment. In terms of regulation of the BBC, I think the question that I have and I kind of posed in my talk was whether actually any form of regulatory structure that you put around a public service broadcaster can be effective in terms of working out what that public service broadcaster should and shouldn't do. Instead, what seems to happen is policymakers fall back onto the question of funding, and the easiest way to regulate a public service broadcaster is to cut its funding, and I think that misses a bigger question.
So for you to compete with BBC, what's the biggest issue for The Guardian in the future to be relevant for your readers?
So we're doing brilliantly well in the world. We're the second most read English-speaking newspaper, news brand as we call ourselves now. We're 2/3 of our audience is outside the UK. The issue that we have is we are now competing with the BBC, who is commercialising its licence fee funded content outside the UK. And there I think we've just got big questions about whether we're doing that on a level playing field with the BBC, whether actually there is enough separation between the BBC's public service side and its commercial news side. And we're hoping, as I say, that will be looked at through the charter review process.